Hey guys, tonight we're travelling back to the 1400s. Not into the grand hall of a king, not into the chamber of a queen, and not onto a battlefield filled with shining knights, but into a small medieval village where most people actually lived. So dim the lights, get comfortable, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let yourself slowly settle into the quiet world of ordinary people trying to survive one day at a time. Imagine you're waking before sunrise inside a small cottage made of timber, clay, straw, and whatever materials your family could afford. There is no soft mattress, no private bedroom, no warm shower waiting nearby, and certainly no alarm clock. Instead, your morning begins with the sound of a rooster, distant church bells, animals moving outside, and perhaps someone in your family already stepping carefully across the dark room to restart the fire. Your home is small, smoky, and crowded. The floor may be packed earth, covered in rushes, straw, or whatever helps keep the cold away. Your family sleeps close together because space is limited and warmth matters. In winter, the air is so cold that waking up feels less like starting a peaceful day and more like being personally attacked by the weather. The first thing you notice is smoke. Medieval cottages often had open hearths for cooking and warmth, and smoke did not always leave politely through a proper chimney. It lingered in the rafters, clung to clothing, filled the room, and became part of daily life. If your eyes watered in the morning, that was not necessarily emotion. It was probably the house. Breakfast is simple because medieval peasants rarely begin the day with anything luxurious. You might eat coarse bread, porridge, onions, cheese if your family has some, or leftover pottage from the night before. Pottage is one of the great survivors of medieval food history. A thick stew of grains, vegetables, beans, herbs, and whatever else can be stretched into a meal. This food is not glamorous, but it matters. Every bite represents work, storage, harvest, and luck. A bad season can turn a comfortable meal into a memory. Hunger is never far away in medieval village life. Even when food is available, people think carefully about how long supplies will last. After eating, the day begins properly, and by properly, we mean work. A medieval peasant's life is built around labour. If you are a farmer, the land controls your schedule. Spring brings ploughing and planting. Summer brings weeding, haymaking, and animal care. Autumn brings harvest, which is exhausting but essential. Winter may slow field work, but it does not create a holiday. There is always wood to gather, tools to repair, animals to feed, and cold to survive. The work is physical in a way modern people rarely experience. Your body is your machine, your hands are your tools, your back, shoulders, legs, and feet carry the entire day. If the plough breaks, someone must fix it. If an animal becomes sick, the household suffers. If rain comes at the wrong time, weeks of labour may be ruined, and the land you work may not even belong fully to you. Many peasants lived under systems where land was controlled by a lord, monastery, or local estate. You farmed strips of land, owed labour services, paid rents, provided dues, and gave part of what you produced. It is a deeply frustrating arrangement when you spend months growing food and then watch portions of it leave your hands. The church also receives its share. The tithe, often a tenth of produce or income, supports religious institutions. In a deeply Christian society, the church is central to life, but that does not make handing over grain easier when your own family worries about winter. By mid-morning, the village is fully awake. Smoke rises from cottages. Women prepare food, carry water, spin thread, mend clothing, care for children, and help with farm tasks. Men work fields, repair fences, manage animals, cut wood, or perform labour owed to the Lord. Children are not free from responsibility either. By a young age, they help gather sticks, watch animals, scare birds from fields, fetch water, or assist adults. There is no modern childhood in the soft sense. Children play when they can, but survival teaches early. A child in a medieval village learns quickly that everyone contributes because the household depends on every pair of hands. The village itself is small but full of life. There may be cottages clustered around a church, fields stretching outward, gardens near homes, animals wandering close by, and muddy paths connecting everything. Chickens scratch in the dirt. Pigs root noisily. Cows move slowly toward pasture. Dogs bark at nothing in particular, which appears to be a tradition older than history. The smells are everywhere. Wood smoke, damp earth, animals, sweat, cooking stew, manure, wet wool and hay, all mixed together. To modern noses it might feel overwhelming. To you, it is simply home, and then there is water. Clean water is not always guaranteed, and fetching it is work. Someone must walk to a well, stream or village source and carry it back. This is not a quick turn of a tap. Every bucket has weight. Every trip takes time. Water is needed for cooking, animals, washing, brewing, and daily survival. Washing exists, but not in the modern sense. People care about cleanliness, especially visible cleanliness, but regular full bathing is difficult. Soap can be expensive. Water takes effort. Heating water takes fuel. Clothing may be washed when possible, but not casually. The result is a world where smoke and sweat cling to the body far more than anyone would enjoy today. By midday, the work continues. If it is harvest season, the pace becomes intense. The entire village may move into the fields, cutting grain by hand with sickles, tying sheaves, carrying bundles, and racing against weather. Harvest is both hopeful and terrifying, because it determines whether the coming months will be bearable. A good harvest means food, rent, seed, and survival. A bad harvest means hunger, debt, and fear. There is no supermarket waiting beyond the hill. There is no backup plan arriving in plastic packaging. The field is the plan. This makes weather one of the most powerful forces in your life. Rain at the wrong time can rot crops. Drought can weaken them. Frost can destroy young growth. Storms can flatten grain. Medieval people watched the sky closely because the sky could decide their future. After long hours outside, your body aches. Your hands are rough. Your clothing smells of earth and smoke. Your feet may be wet from mud. Your back complains constantly, though unfortunately nobody cares because everyone's back complains constantly. And yet, amid the hardship, medieval village life is not only misery. People laugh, they gossip, they sing while working, they tell stories, they share news, they complain about taxes, weather, neighbours, and probably the quality of bread because some human traditions are eternal. Community matters because survival often requires cooperation. Neighbours help during harvest, families share tools, villagers gather for church, festivals, marriages, funerals, and seasonal celebrations. In a world with few comforts, people create warmth through each other. As evening approaches, the light begins fading. This matters because darkness changes everything. Without electricity, night arrives with authority. Candles are expensive and oil lamps require fuel, so ordinary households do not waste light casually. When the sun goes down, the world becomes smaller, quieter, and more dangerous to move through. Dinner is often another simple meal: bread, pottage, ale, perhaps cheese, vegetables, or preserved meat if available. Meat is not everyday food for many peasants. It appears more often during special occasions, if animals are slaughtered, or if fortune allows. Most meals are built from grains, legumes, vegetables, dairy, and whatever can be stretched. After dinner, household tasks continue, tools are checked, animals are secured, clothing is mended, children settle down. Someone may tell a story by firelight, perhaps about saints, local legends, old battles, foolish neighbours, or strange things said to happen in nearby woods. Then comes sleep. But medieval sleep is not always peaceful. The cottage is crowded. The straw mattress may scratch. Fleas may be present. Rats may move in the walls. The fire dies down. Cold creeps into the room. Animals outside make noise. Someone snores. Someone coughs. A baby cries. And still, after a day of labour, your body welcomes rest. Because tomorrow will bring the same pattern again. Wake, eat, work, worry, pray, endure, and sleep. That is the rhythm of ordinary medieval life. Not crowns, not castles, not velvet gowns, just earth, hunger, weather, faith, family, labour, and survival. By now you have survived the first exhausting days of medieval peasant life. You wake before sunrise, work until sunset, live in a crowded, smoky cottage, and fall asleep on straw, while hoping tomorrow's weather does not destroy everything you have worked for. At this point, you may think the hardest part of peasant life is the endless labour. Unfortunately, the 1400s still have several unpleasant surprises waiting for you. Because hard work was only one part of survival. The deeper fear, the one quietly sitting behind every harvest and every meal, was hunger. Modern people usually assume food will be available somewhere. If one place runs out, another store exists. If the fridge is empty, food can be delivered. Medieval peasants had no such safety net. Food security depended heavily on land, weather, storage, and luck. And luck, unfortunately, was not always generous. Every season carried risk. Too much rain ruined crops. Too little rain ruined crops. Frost ruined crops. Insects ruined crops. Disease ruined crops. Birds ruined crops. At some point, medieval farmers may have felt the entire universe was personally invested in destroying wheat. A good harvest meant relief. Grain stores filled, bread remained available, animals survived winter, families ate regularly. But a bad harvest changed everything. Suddenly every meal became calculation. How much grain remains? How long must supplies last? Can we reduce portions? Should we save seed for planting or eat it now? These were not abstract concerns. These were survival decisions. Eating seed grain might save you this month but destroy next year's harvest. Not eating it might leave you hungry now. Neither option feels good. Bread formed the foundation of daily life for many peasants. But even bread varied depending on wealth. Wealthier households ate finer white bread. Poorer households often ate coarse dark bread made from rye, barley, oats, or mixed grains. Sometimes flour quality was poor, sometimes filler ingredients appeared. During severe shortages, bread might include peas, beans, acorns, chestnut flour, or whatever could stretch supply. Hunger makes people creative in ways luxury never demands. Pottage remained another essential food. The pot hanging over the hearth became the centre of household survival. Vegetables, grains, herbs, legumes, and scraps went in. The pot changed daily depending on availability. Some days the stew felt satisfying. Other days it felt suspiciously like hot water trying its best. Meat existed, but many peasants did not eat it regularly. Animals had value beyond immediate food. A cow produced milk. Chickens laid eggs. Sheep gave wool. Killing livestock too casually could hurt long-term survival. As a result, meat often appeared during festivals, special occasions, or rare fortunate moments. For ordinary days, people relied heavily on grains and vegetables. Then came winter. Winter transformed ordinary difficulty into serious danger. Fields slept beneath frost. Fresh vegetables became scarce. Fuel mattered constantly. Firewood became precious. Cold entered homes through walls, doors, roofs, and every tiny gap nature could exploit. Hunger felt sharper in winter because warmth required energy, and energy required food. A long winter after poor harvests created real fear, and fear led people toward desperate solutions. Historical records mention people surviving on roots, bark, wild plants, and low-quality substitutes during famine. Some regions suffered devastating shortages where entire communities weakened under starvation. Hunger was not always dramatic like in stories. Sometimes it arrived quietly. Meals became smaller, energy dropped, children weakened, adults worked slower, illness spread more easily. The body simply had less strength to resist. And that leads us to another constant threat of medieval life: disease. In the medieval world, sickness could appear suddenly and change everything. There were no antibiotics, no hospitals in the modern sense, no reliable painkillers, no medical scans, and no convenient pharmacy. If you became seriously ill, you depended on prayer, rest, luck, local knowledge, and whatever remedies people believed might help. Sometimes remedies helped. Sometimes they did not. The biggest problem was simple. Medieval people lacked modern understanding of germs. They knew sickness spread, but they did not fully understand bacteria or viruses. They recognized patterns without understanding the invisible causes behind them. This meant treatments often mixed practical experience with superstition, religion, and ancient medical theory. Village medicine usually came from local healers, herbal knowledge, wise women, monks, barbers, or anyone with experience treating injuries and illness. Herbal remedies could include garlic, sage, mint, honey, onion, willow bark, and various plants. Some treatments were surprisingly effective. Honey, for example, has real antibacterial properties. Willow bark contains compounds related to aspirin. So medieval medicine was not entirely nonsense. But then there were treatments that feel less reassuring. Bloodletting was popular. The theory suggested imbalance of bodily humours caused illness. If too much blood or certain humours existed, removing blood might restore balance. Leeches were also used. Yes, actual leeches. Imagine feeling weak and feverish and someone says, "Good news, we're going to attach worms to you." Not comforting. Then there was dentistry, or more accurately, the lack of comfortable dentistry. A toothache in the medieval world could become a genuine nightmare. Modern people complain about dental appointments, but at least dentists use anaesthesia, sterilised tools and advanced techniques. Medieval peasants had none of that. Tooth decay was common. Bread often contained tiny stone particles from grinding grain, which gradually wore down teeth. Add poor oral hygiene and years of hard eating, and dental pain became common. A cavity might become infection. Infection might cause swelling. Swelling could become unbearable. And treatment? If lucky, someone applied herbal remedies for pain. If unlucky, the tooth came out without modern anaesthesia, using force. That alone might be enough to keep anyone awake at night. Infections were even worse. A small cut while chopping wood, a blister from walking, a scrape from farming tools, or a minor wound from daily labour could become dangerous. Today a small cut feels routine. In the 1400s, infection transformed minor injuries into serious threats. Dirt entered wounds, swelling increased, fever followed, pain worsened. Without antibiotics, the body fought largely alone. Sometimes it won, sometimes it did not. Childbirth created another major danger. Pregnancy and birth were extraordinarily risky for medieval women. Even healthy pregnancies could turn dangerous within hours. Complications, infection, hemorrhage, and prolonged labour claimed many lives. Families understood this harsh reality well. Childbirth brought hope and fear in equal measure. Infant mortality was also painfully high. This shaped family life deeply. Many children did not survive to adulthood. Parents loved their children, but they also lived with constant awareness that survival was uncertain. Illness that feels treatable today could become fatal in days. Then there was plague. Even if you somehow avoided hunger, infection, injuries, and harsh winters, medieval Europe still carried the memory of one of history's deadliest disasters, the Black Death. By the 1400s, Europe still remembered plague's devastation. Entire villages had been emptied. Entire families vanished. Labour shortages changed economies. Fear of disease became part of collective memory. Imagine growing up hearing stories of entire communities wiped out by sickness. That leaves scars. And disease was not always dramatic. Sometimes the most exhausting part was uncertainty. A cough might mean nothing, or something terrible. A fever might pass, or worsen overnight. People lived with constant vulnerability because medical certainty barely existed. Perhaps the cruelest part of peasant life was this. Even after working endlessly to survive, forces beyond your control could still destroy everything. Weather, hunger, sickness, infection, childbirth, plague. These were enemies no plough or sickle could defeat. And yet, people kept going. They still laughed, still married, still had children, still planted seeds, still prayed, still hoped. Because hope, even in the harshest centuries, remained one of humanity's strongest survival tools. As night falls over your village once again, the fire burns low. Outside, cold wind moves across dark fields. Inside the cottage, your body aches from labour. Your stomach feels only partly full, and somewhere nearby someone coughs in the darkness. You pull your rough blanket closer and close your eyes. Tomorrow, if fortune allows, you will wake again. By now, you have survived endless physical labour, unpredictable harvests, food shortages, disease, infection, winter cold, and the constant fear that something as simple as a toothache could ruin your life. At this point, you might think medieval peasant life is mainly a struggle against nature. Unfortunately, nature was only half the problem. The other half wore expensive clothing, lived in larger buildings, and expected payment from your hard work. Welcome to the world of lords, taxes, and power. One of the harshest realities of being a medieval peasant was understanding that no matter how hard you worked, much of what you produced did not remain yours. The land beneath your feet, the fields you ploughed, and even some of the tools you used often existed within a larger feudal system, controlled by people far above your social position. You worked the land, but that did not necessarily mean you owned it. For many peasants, life was tied directly to a manor. The manor functioned as the centre of local economic life. It included farmland, woods, grazing areas, mills, and usually the lord's residence, whether a manor house or small castle. The local lord controlled this system, and his authority touched nearly every part of your life. This meant your survival depended not only on weather and harvest, but also on obligations. A lot of obligations. You owed rent, you owed labour, you owed dues, you owed service. Sometimes you owed fees for things modern people rarely think about. Want to grind grain into flour? You might need to use the Lord's mill and pay for it. Want to bake bread? Certain rights and fees may apply. Need to use woodland resources? That might be restricted too. At some point, a peasant could reasonably wonder whether even breathing required a small payment. And in some years, it probably felt that way. Taxes came in many forms. Some were predictable. Others arrived when rulers needed money for war, building projects, or political problems. Kings needed armies. Armies needed money. Money often came from taxes moving downward through the system, until eventually ordinary workers carried much of the burden, which meant your exhausting harvest season ended with another uncomfortable realization. People with power were coming to collect. Imagine spending months plowing, planting, protecting crops from weather, birds, and pests, harvesting by hand, carrying grain under the hot sun, storing supplies for winter, and finally feeling some relief. Then carts arrive. Officials count sacks, measurements are taken, payments are expected, and suddenly a meaningful portion of your hard-earned food is no longer yours. That is difficult enough during a good year. During a bad year, it feels devastating. Of course, the Lord was not the only authority expecting support. There was also the church. Now, the medieval church was not simply a place for weekly worship. It stood at the centre of spiritual, social, and political life. Church bells structured time. Priests performed baptisms, marriages, funerals, confessions, and mass. Religious festivals shaped the calendar. For many people, the church explained life, death, morality, suffering, and eternity. It also collected resources. The tithe, often around 1/10 of produce or income, supported church functions. This was considered religious duty. Refusing was not merely financial rebellion, it could carry spiritual consequences. In a deeply religious society, being seen as resisting church obligations was dangerous, because medieval people genuinely believed in heaven, hell, sin, divine punishment, and eternal judgment. That shaped everything. Modern people may view religion as personal belief. Medieval Europeans often experienced religion as reality woven into daily life. If crops failed, perhaps God was displeased. If storms destroyed fields, perhaps divine warning existed. If disease spread, maybe sin had brought punishment. This worldview made spiritual anxiety constant. You did not simply worry about surviving winter. You worried about your soul. Did you confess properly? Did you miss Mass? Did you commit sins without repentance? Would suffering continue after death? Heavy thoughts for someone already carrying firewood in freezing weather. The church also shaped ideas about social order. Many people believed hierarchy reflected divine design. Kings ruled above nobles. Nobles ruled above peasants. Priests guided souls. Everyone had roles. This belief made rebellion complicated, because resisting authority could feel like resisting sacred order itself. That does not mean peasants never resisted. They absolutely did, and when pressure became unbearable, frustration could explode. But before we reach rebellion, we need to talk about law, because medieval justice could be unsettling. Very unsettling. Modern legal systems, despite flaws, usually involve structured courts, formal evidence rules, professional lawyers, and established procedures. Medieval justice varied greatly by region and time, but for ordinary villagers, law often felt immediate, local, and heavily influenced by power. Minor disputes might involve village courts or manor courts, arguments over land, boundary disputes, animal damage, unpaid debts, stolen goods, broken agreements, and then there were punishments. Punishments were often public. This mattered because punishment served two purposes: penalizing wrongdoing and warning everyone else. Public humiliation became common. Stocks and pillories are famous examples. If someone committed certain offences, they might be locked in wooden restraints in public spaces, while neighbours watched, mocked, insulted, or occasionally threw unpleasant objects. And by unpleasant, we mean rotten food, mud, or worse. Much worse. Human creativity in humiliation has always been alarming. More serious crimes brought harsher consequences: whipping, branding, mutilation, imprisonment, execution. The severity depended on crime, region, status, and politics. Status mattered a lot. This is another harsh truth of medieval society. Justice was not always equal. A noble and a peasant could experience the legal system very differently. Shocking, I know. Power influenced outcomes. Connections mattered. Wealth mattered. Reputation mattered. And for peasants with little of those things, vulnerability remained constant. Even hunting could become dangerous legally. Imagine walking through nearby forest and spotting a deer. Your family is hungry. Meat would help enormously. But if that forest belongs to the Lord, hunting without permission may count as poaching. And poaching was taken seriously, because game animals symbolized elite privilege, meaning the deer roaming freely through the woods could be more protected by law than the hungry peasant watching it. That is frustrating on a profound level. Marriage also involved control. Many peasants married within local communities, but marriage was not purely romantic freedom. Economic survival mattered. Households needed labour. Families considered land access, skills, resources, and alliances. Love could exist. Practicality usually came first, and once married, responsibilities multiplied. Children arrived, more mouths to feed, more hands to raise, more futures to worry about. High infant mortality meant parents lived with constant uncertainty. Even after surviving childbirth, there was no guarantee a child would reach adulthood. Illness, hunger, accidents, and infection remained constant threats. Loss became tragically familiar. This shaped emotional life deeply. Medieval people felt love and grief as intensely as modern people. They cried, they mourned, they feared loss. The harshness of life did not reduce emotion, it often intensified it. And still, life continued. Work resumed the next morning. Taxes remained due. Church bells rang. Animals needed feeding. Fields needed tending. Children needed care. The system never paused simply because you felt exhausted. Perhaps that was one of the cruelest aspects of peasant life. Exhaustion changed nothing. You still had to continue. Yet amid all this pressure, something remarkable persisted. Community. Neighbours helped during crises. Villagers shared tools. Families supported one another. Festivals brought joy. Music existed. Storytelling existed. Laughter existed. Because even under heavy systems of power, ordinary people remained human. They found ways to live, ways to love, ways to celebrate, ways to endure. And that endurance may be the most impressive thing about medieval peasant life. By now, you have survived nearly everything medieval peasant life can throw at you. You have endured endless labour in the fields, hunger during bad harvests, harsh winters, disease, infection, taxes, church obligations, and a social system that constantly reminds you that powerful people live much more comfortably than you do. At this point, medieval life may sound like an endless cycle of suffering, and to be fair, much of it was incredibly hard. But if we stop the story there, we miss something important. Medieval peasants were not simply miserable people waiting for life to end. They laughed, celebrated, fell in love, raised families, told stories, played games, and found joy wherever they could. In fact, perhaps the most remarkable thing about ordinary medieval people was not how much they suffered, but how much humanity they preserved despite suffering. One of the rare but precious breaks from endless labour came through festivals and holy days. While peasants worked extremely hard, the medieval calendar was not completely empty of celebration. Religious feast days, seasonal festivals, weddings, harvest celebrations and local fairs brought moments of joy into otherwise exhausting lives. These events mattered enormously because they broke routine. For once the village moved differently, work slowed, food improved if supplies allowed, music appeared, people wore better clothing, the church bells sounded less like commands and more like invitations to gather. Children became excited, adults allowed themselves rare relaxation, even people burdened by hardship still needed joy, perhaps especially them. Harvest festivals were among the most meaningful celebrations because they marked survival. A successful harvest meant the terrifying uncertainty of summer had eased. Grain had been gathered. Food stores were fuller. Winter still posed danger, but at least hope felt stronger. Villagers might share ale, bread, roasted meat if fortune allowed, and spend precious hours talking, laughing, dancing, and listening to musicians or storytellers. For a brief evening, sore backs and rough hands mattered a little less. The same people who spent months bent over fields now moved to music under torchlight. It is easy to forget this when imagining medieval life, but joy did exist there, even if it often arrived in small, hard-earned pieces. Entertainment looked very different from today, of course. There was no television, no internet, no streaming, no video games. Entertainment came from people. Stories were one of the most powerful forms of escape. Villagers gathered around fires listening to tales of saints, miracles, local legends, old wars, ghosts, heroic knights, clever peasants, dangerous forests, and mysterious creatures said to roam beyond the village. Some stories were meant to teach, some to warn children, some simply to entertain. Human beings have always loved stories, especially after exhausting days when imagination offers temporary escape from reality. A storyteller with talent could command an entire room, using nothing but voice and memory. Music mattered too. Simple instruments like flutes, drums, fiddles, pipes, and harps could transform ordinary gatherings into celebrations. Dancing became another important social activity. Not elegant royal ballroom dancing, but energetic communal movement filled with rhythm and life. After all, when daily existence revolves around survival, moments of movement for joy feel powerful. Even games existed. Dice, wrestling, racing, archery contests, and local competitions gave people ways to challenge each other outside labour. Medieval peasants may not have had luxury, but they understood fun. Love and marriage also brought meaning, though not always in the romantic way modern films prefer. Marriage for peasants often involved practical concerns, labour, household survival, land access, and shared responsibility. But practicality did not eliminate affection. Couples built lives together through work, sacrifice, and endurance. Love often looked less like poetry and more like partnership. Sharing hardship created deep bonds. Imagine surviving famine, winter, childbirth, and labour side by side for decades. That creates intimacy in ways grand romantic gestures cannot easily match. A husband repairing shoes for his wife before winter, a wife saving better food for her exhausted husband after harvest, parents staying awake with sick children through cold nights. These quiet acts were often the true language of love. Children brought both joy and fear. Medieval parents loved their children deeply, but parenthood carried constant anxiety because survival was uncertain. Infant mortality remained heartbreakingly high. Illness could take a child quickly. Accidents happened. Malnutrition weakened young bodies. Parents lived with a painful truth. Loving someone did not guarantee keeping them. That reality shaped emotional life profoundly. Every birthday, every healthy season, every sign of growth became meaningful because nothing was guaranteed. And yet families kept hoping. They kept raising children, teaching them skills, telling stories, and preparing them for the same difficult world they themselves had inherited. Old age, if you reached it, changed your role in the village. Reaching old age itself was an achievement. Life expectancy numbers often sound low for medieval times, but that is heavily affected by child mortality. If you survived childhood and avoided major disease, reaching older adulthood was possible. Still, aging in a labour-driven world brought challenges. Your body slowed, your strength faded. The tasks once completed in hours now took longer. Hands stiffened, joints ached, vision worsened. Teeth, if any remained healthy, became fewer. Years of manual labour left marks everywhere. The body remembered every harvest, every winter, every injury. But elders often gained something valuable in return: knowledge and respect. Older villagers remembered past harvests, old disputes, weather patterns, local history, family connections, herbal remedies, and practical survival wisdom. They carried memory. In communities built on oral knowledge, memory mattered immensely. Younger generations listened because experience saved lives. Which crops handled poor rain better? Which herbs eased fever? Which lord could be trusted less than he smiled? Older people knew things books never recorded. Eventually, however, everyone faced the final certainty: death. Modern people often avoid discussing death, but medieval people lived much closer to it. Death was familiar. Families saw illness, accidents, childbirth deaths, famine, and old age regularly. Cemeteries stood beside churches at the centre of community life. Funeral bells were common sounds. Children grew up understanding mortality early. This did not make death easy, but it made it real in a way modern societies often distance themselves from. Religion shaped death deeply. Most peasants believed earthly suffering was temporary, and eternal life mattered more. Heaven, hell, purgatory, judgment, sin, repentance. These ideas were not abstract theology. They shaped emotional reality. Many endured hardship partly because they believed justice ultimately existed beyond earthly life. If life felt unfair, eternity promised meaning. If suffering felt unbearable, faith offered comfort. Whether through prayer, confession, mass, or ritual, religion helped people process mortality. A medieval peasant funeral was often simple but meaningful. Bells rang. Family gathered, neighbours attended, prayers were offered. The body was buried in consecrated ground if possible. Grief was communal because village life was communal. When someone died, everyone felt the absence. One less worker in harvest, one less voice by the fire, one less presence in church. In small communities, death reshaped daily life immediately, and perhaps this brings us to the most important truth about medieval peasant life. From the outside, history often focuses on kings, queens, knights, castles, and wars. Those stories are dramatic and memorable, but they were not most people's lives. Most people were peasants, ordinary workers, farmers, mothers, fathers, blacksmiths, bakers, shepherds, carpenters, the people who planted food, raised children, repaired tools, built villages, and kept society functioning. They rarely appear in famous paintings. They did not leave giant monuments. Most never became legends. And yet civilization depended on them. Without peasants, kings do not eat. Without peasants, armies do not march. Without peasants, castles do not function. Without peasants, kingdoms collapse. That is the great irony of history. The people with the least power often carried the heaviest burden. So, was being a medieval peasant exhausting? Absolutely. It was physically brutal, emotionally difficult, economically fragile, and deeply uncertain. Every season brought new risks. Hunger lurked in bad harvests. Disease appeared without warning. Winter punished weakness. Taxes reduced security. Labour never truly ended. And still, they lived. They adapted. They laughed. They loved. They endured. Perhaps that endurance is the most extraordinary part of all. As our journey through the medieval village comes to an end, night settles over the fields once again. Smoke rises gently from cottages. The last animal noises fade into darkness. The church bell rings softly in the distance. Inside your small cottage, the fire burns low. Your body aches from work. Your hands are rough. Your stomach is not completely full, but full enough. Your children sleep nearby. The wind moves softly outside. Tomorrow will bring more labour, more worries, more responsibilities. But tonight, for a few precious hours, you rest. No lords collecting taxes, no storms destroying crops, no fields demanding labour, just darkness, warmth, silence, and sleep. So the next time you imagine medieval Europe, remember this. Behind every castle stood thousands of ordinary people, whose names history forgot, but whose labour built the world around them. They may never have worn crowns or commanded armies, but they possessed something equally impressive, the strength to survive, and sometimes that is the greatest achievement of all. After everything you've survived so far, backbreaking labour, hunger, disease, taxes, and constant uncertainty, you might assume that nighttime at least offers relief. Surely after 12 to 14 hours of exhausting physical work, sleep comes easily. You lie down, close your eyes, and drift peacefully into rest. Unfortunately, medieval peasant life still has one final joke to play on you. Even sleeping could be exhausting. In fact, for many peasants, nighttime comfort was a luxury they barely understood. The simple act of resting your body through the night was often interrupted by cold, insects, noise, smoke, and overcrowding. Your house, if we're being generous enough to call it comfortable, is a small timber-framed cottage with walls made from wattle and daub, a mixture of woven wood strips covered in mud, clay, straw, and dung. It is practical, affordable, and surprisingly durable. It is also not especially good at keeping nature outside. Tiny cracks in walls allow wind to slip through during winter. Moisture seeps in during rain. Insects find entry points with remarkable efficiency. The roof above you is made from thatch, bundled straw or reeds layered thickly to keep water out. It works well enough unless the weather becomes severe, animals move in, or sections begin decaying. And that last problem is common. Thatched roofs created an unexpected secondary population above your head. Birds nested there, mice hid there, rats sometimes explored there. Fleas and lice considered the area excellent real estate, which means while you're trying to sleep, something may be moving quietly above you. You may hear scratching in the darkness, a rustle in the roof, tiny feet running across wooden beams. Not exactly relaxing. Medieval peasants lived much closer to animals than modern people do, and not always by choice. And then there is the smoke. Earlier we talked about the hearth being the heart of the cottage, and that remains true at night. The fire provides warmth, cooking, and light. But smoke rarely disappears completely. Many peasant homes lacked efficient chimneys, especially poorer ones. Smoke gathered near the roof and lingered in the room. During cold nights, when the fire is kept alive longer, smoke becomes part of your sleeping environment. Your eyes may sting. Your lungs inhale it constantly. You get used to it, but getting used to discomfort does not make it healthy. Winter nights are especially brutal. Medieval winters could be deadly, particularly for poor households with limited fuel. Once the fire weakens, cold spreads fast. Blankets are rough wool or layered cloth if you're lucky. If not, warmth depends heavily on shared body heat. Entire families sleeping close together was not just about space, it helped survival. The human body became part of the heating system. You may pull rough blankets tighter, curl inward, and still feel cold air biting your face. Some mornings you wake and immediately regret existing. Summer brings different misery. The same cottage that feels freezing in winter can become hot and stuffy during warm nights. Insects thrive, fleas bite, mosquitoes buzz near your ears. Flies seem determined to investigate every inch of your existence. If animals sleep nearby, smells intensify. Heat, odour, noise, and insects combine into a sleep experience modern hotel guests would rate very poorly. And then there is sound. Medieval villages were not silent. They were quieter than modern cities in some ways, yes, but not peaceful in the romantic fantasy sense. Dogs bark at strange noises. Chickens react to nothing. Pigs grunt. Cows shift in stalls. Wind rattles wood. Rain hits thatch. Babies cry. Someone snores with terrifying commitment. Someone coughs through the night. If illness exists in the household, sleep becomes even harder. You may lie awake listening to a sick family member breathing unevenly, wondering if morning will come kindly. Despite all this, medieval peasants still slept. They had to. The body eventually demands rest no matter the conditions, and perhaps that is one of the most impressive truths about ordinary people of the Middle Ages. They adapted to discomfort modern people would struggle to tolerate for even a single week. They worked hard, slept rough, woke early, and repeated the cycle for years, yet somehow they endured. After surviving endless days of hard labour, hunger, disease, taxes, and all the exhausting realities of medieval peasant life, you might assume that night finally offers peace. Surely after working in fields from sunrise to sunset, carrying heavy loads, repairing tools, feeding animals, and enduring cold winds or burning sun, the one reward waiting for you must be sleep. A long, peaceful, comfortable sleep. Unfortunately, medieval life still has one final unpleasant surprise. Even sleeping could be exhausting. In fact, for many peasants, nighttime was not always restful at all. Sleep was necessary, yes, but comfort was rare. The body rested because it had no choice, not because conditions were ideal. If a modern person spent even 3 nights in a typical 1400s peasant cottage, they would probably gain a completely new appreciation for mattresses, heating, and indoor plumbing. Your home is small, simple, and built using whatever materials your village can access. Most peasant cottages are made with timber frames filled with wattle and daub, a practical combination of woven wooden strips packed with mud, straw, clay, and sometimes dung. It sounds crude, but it works reasonably well for people without access to stone mansions or expensive construction. The The roof is usually thatched using straw or reeds, layered thickly enough to keep out rain. From a distance, the cottage may look charming, almost picturesque, the sort of building people today might photograph and call cosy. Living inside it, however, gives a very different impression. The walls are not perfectly sealed. Small cracks allow wind to sneak inside. During winter, cold air somehow finds every opening with supernatural precision. It slips under doors, through walls, and around the roof. You may stuff gaps with cloth, straw, or mud, but winter always seems to win eventually. Inside, space is extremely limited. Forget private bedrooms, forget personal space, forget quiet corners where you can relax alone. Most peasant families live, cook, eat, work, and sleep in one main room. That means when night comes, the place where you prepared food just hours earlier now becomes the place where everyone sleeps. Parents sleep there, children sleep there, sometimes grandparents sleep there too. If space becomes particularly tight, even small livestock may shelter nearby during harsh weather, because animals are valuable and losing one to cold or theft can be disastrous. Imagine trying to sleep while a goat makes suspicious noises nearby and a chicken somehow decides midnight is the perfect time to become active. Privacy is practically non-existent. The concept of "I need some alone time" would sound almost luxurious. Then there is the bed itself, assuming you are fortunate enough to have something clearly recognizable as a bed. Wealthier households might own wooden bed frames with mattresses stuffed using wool, feathers, or softer materials. Most peasants are less fortunate. Bedding often consists of simple wooden benches, rough frames, sacks stuffed with straw, hay, or dried leaves, or layered cloth placed directly on the floor. Straw is common because it is cheap and available, but straw has limitations. It shifts constantly, compresses unevenly, pokes through fabric, and becomes less comfortable the longer it is used. Imagine lying down after 14 hours of exhausting work, only to discover something sharp pressing into your back because a piece of straw has decided violence is appropriate. Not ideal. Pillows are simple cloth sacks filled with soft scraps if available. Luxurious softness is not the goal. Survival is. The roof above your head creates another problem modern people rarely consider. Thatched roofs are useful, but they also attract life. Birds nest in them. Mice live in them. Rats explore them. Insects thrive in them. Fleas absolutely adore environments like this. So as you lie in darkness, tired beyond words, you may hear scratching above. Tiny movements, rustling straw, small feet running across wooden beams. Something is always moving. The house is never entirely still, even if nothing enters your bedding directly. Knowing that unseen creatures are living above your head does not create ideal sleep conditions. Medieval peasants shared space not only with family, but with entire tiny ecosystems. And then come the fleas. Fleas may be among the most irritating companions of medieval life. Bedding made from straw and cloth creates excellent habitat for them. Animals nearby make the problem worse. Fleas bite relentlessly. Lice are another frequent issue. Bedbugs may appear too. In other words, while you're trying to sleep, something may be feeding on you. Imagine finally finding a comfortable position after a long day, slowly drifting towards sleep, and then feeling the unmistakable irritation of something biting your skin. You scratch, shift, settle again, and then another bite arrives somewhere else. Peaceful sleep becomes a negotiation with tiny enemies that never seem to tire. The fire, which keeps the household alive during the day, creates a different nighttime challenge. The hearth remains central to the home. It provides heat, cooking, and light. But smoke remains a constant issue. Many peasant cottages lack efficient chimneys, especially poorer ones. Smoke rises upward but often lingers beneath the roof or slowly spreads throughout the room. During colder months, when fires burn longer, smoke becomes part of the sleeping environment. Your eyes may sting slightly. Your lungs constantly inhale traces of smoke. Over years, this affects health, but immediate discomfort matters too. Imagine trying to sleep in a room that always smells faintly of ash, burnt wood, and soot. Eventually you get used to it, but getting used to discomfort is not the same as comfort. Winter nights are perhaps the hardest. Medieval winters could be brutal, especially for poor households with limited firewood. Once the fire weakens overnight, temperature drops fast. Blankets are made from wool or rough cloth if you are lucky enough to own enough of them. If not, body heat becomes essential. This is one reason families slept close together. Shared warmth improved survival. You pull rough blankets tightly around yourself, curl inward, and hope morning arrives soon. Still, your face may feel freezing. Fingers feel stiff. Breathing cold air hurts slightly. Some mornings you wake feeling as though you never truly warmed up at all. There are nights when sleep becomes a series of half-awake moments spent adjusting position to preserve warmth. Summer is not necessarily better. The same cottage that feels freezing in winter can become hot and suffocating in warm weather. Airflow is limited. Heat lingers. Insects multiply. Flies buzz endlessly. Mosquitoes seem personally offended by your existence. Sweat sticks to your skin. Bedding feels damp and uncomfortable. Add the smell of animals, old straw, smoke, sweat, damp wool, and crowded bodies, and nighttime becomes an experience many modern people would find overwhelming. Medieval life had a smell, and at night in a crowded cottage that smell intensified. Noise presents another challenge. People often romanticize pre-industrial nights as perfectly silent, but village nights were full of sound. Dogs bark suddenly at movement outside. Chickens make strange noises. Pigs grunt. Cows shift in stalls. Wind rattles wooden walls. Rain hits thatch. Babies cry. Someone snores like a collapsing cart. Someone coughs repeatedly through the night. Coughing was common because smoke, illness, cold air, and poor health all affected breathing. If someone in the household is sick, everyone hears it. Sleep becomes lighter because concern joins discomfort. You may lie awake listening to someone struggle with fever or breathing, wondering if they will improve by morning. Then there is fear. Darkness in the medieval world feels different from darkness today. Modern people can switch on lights instantly. Medieval darkness is deep and complete once fire and candles fade. Outside your cottage lies blackness. Beyond the village lie forests, fields, and unknown things. Wolves may exist in some regions, thieves may travel roads, superstitions thrive in darkness. Ghost stories, spirits, demons, witches, strange omens, whether believed fully or not, night amplified imagination. A strange sound outside feels larger in darkness. Every creak matters more. Every distant howl feels unsettling. And yet despite all of this, medieval peasants still slept. They had to. Human bodies eventually surrender to exhaustion. That may be the most extraordinary truth of all. These were people who adapted to discomfort. Modern humans would struggle to tolerate for even a few days. They worked brutally hard, slept in rough conditions, woke before sunrise, and repeated the cycle year after year. They endured cold, heat, insects, noise, smoke, hunger, and stress with a resilience that feels almost unbelievable today. Perhaps that is why ordinary medieval people deserve far more admiration than history often gives them. They did not wear crowns. They did not command armies. Their names rarely appear in books. But they survived lives of relentless difficulty and still managed to build families, communities, traditions, and futures. And as you finally close your eyes inside your small smoky cottage, listening to wind outside and soft breathing around you, one final thought settles in. For a medieval peasant, even sleep was not truly escape. It was simply preparation. Because in a few short hours the rooster will crow again, and the entire exhausting cycle begins once more. After everything you have survived, endless labour, hunger, disease, taxes, cold winters, and sleepless nights, you begin to understand the harshest truth of medieval peasant life. The work never truly ends. Even on days when the fields are quiet, responsibilities remain. Tools need repairing, animals need feeding, roofs need patching, wood needs gathering, and food must always be prepared for tomorrow. There is no real pause button in the 1400s. Rest exists, but complete freedom from responsibility rarely does. And yet, despite all this hardship, medieval peasants were not simply broken people dragging themselves through life. They were resilient in ways that feel almost unimaginable today. They still found reasons to smile. Children still played games in muddy village paths. Young people still fell in love during harvest festivals. Families still laughed around fires while listening to stories of saints, heroes, ghosts, and strange creatures said to wander deep forests after dark. Even in difficult centuries, people remained human. Perhaps that is what makes ordinary medieval life so remarkable. History often focuses on kings, queens, knights, and great battles. But those people were only a tiny fraction of society. Most people were peasants. They were the farmers growing grain, the mothers raising children, the blacksmiths repairing tools, the shepherds watching flocks, and the workers carrying the physical weight of civilization on tired shoulders. Without them, castles do not function, armies do not march, nobles do not feast, kingdoms do not survive. That is the great irony of history. The people with the least power often carried the greatest burden. As night falls over your village once again, darkness slowly covers the fields. Smoke rises from cottages into the cold evening air. The church bell rings one final time in the distance. Inside your small home, the fire burns low, casting soft orange light across rough wooden walls. Your hands ache from labour. Your back feels heavy. Your body is exhausted in a way modern life rarely demands. Still, you are alive. Your family sleeps nearby. The wind moves softly outside. For a few precious hours the world becomes quiet. No lord demanding taxes, no storm threatening crops, no tools to repair, no field to plough. Just silence, just warmth, just rest. Tomorrow the rooster will crow again, and another exhausting day will begin. But tonight, at least for a little while, you can close your eyes and sleep. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of medieval peasant life. They did not survive because life was easy. They survived because they learned to endure what seemed impossible. And sometimes survival itself is the greatest achievement of all. Good night. After everything you have lived through, after the endless labour beneath the sun, the freezing winters that entered through every crack in your home, the bad harvests that made every meal uncertain, the disease that could arrive without warning, the taxes that took portions of what little you had, and the sleepless nights spent in smoky cottages surrounded by cold air, insects and exhaustion, you finally begin to understand the deepest truth about medieval peasant life. The hardest part was not any single disaster. It was the constant repetition of struggle. The labour never truly ended. Survival was not a battle fought once and won. It was a battle fought every single day from birth until death. When modern people imagine the medieval world, they often picture castles rising above hills, knights charging into battle, kings seated on thrones, queens wearing silk gowns, and massive cathedrals glittering in candlelight. Those images are dramatic, beautiful and memorable, but they represent only a tiny fraction of reality. The truth is far simpler and far more human. Most people in medieval Europe never lived in castles. They never wore fine clothing. They never attended royal feasts. They never became famous. Most people were peasants, ordinary workers, farmers, mothers, fathers, shepherds, blacksmiths, bakers, carpenters, villagers whose names disappeared from history even though their labour held the entire structure of society together. This is the great irony of history. The people with the least power often carried the greatest burden. The lord could collect grain because peasants grew it. The king could fund armies because peasants paid taxes. The knights could fight wars because peasants produced food. The clergy could preach from stone churches because peasants built, maintained and supported the communities around them. Entire kingdoms rested upon the shoulders of people who rarely received recognition. They were not celebrated in songs. They were not immortalized in grand portraits. Yet without them, nothing above them could function. And still, despite how heavy life was, medieval peasants were not simply miserable figures trapped in endless suffering. This is important to remember. They were not emotionless machines of labour. They were human beings exactly like us. They loved, they feared, they laughed, they dreamed, they hoped, they complained, they joked with neighbours, they worried about children, they argued with spouses, they celebrated marriages, they cried at funerals, they found beauty in small moments. They were capable of joy even in difficult lives. Perhaps that is one of the most remarkable things about humanity across all centuries. Even under harsh conditions, people continue searching for meaning. A child laughing in a muddy road still sounds like joy. A family sharing warm bread after harvest still feels like comfort. A village gathering around firelight to hear stories still creates wonder. A husband quietly repairing a broken shoe for his wife before winter still looks like love. A mother staying awake beside a feverish child still looks like devotion. These things transcend time. Strip away electricity, technology, and modern convenience, and human emotion remains astonishingly familiar. Perhaps that is why studying ordinary people matters so much. Kings and wars shape borders, yes, but ordinary people shape life itself. They preserve traditions, they raise generations, they pass down practical knowledge. They teach children how to survive. They carry memory forward. In medieval villages, knowledge often lived inside people rather than books. Which herbs reduce fever? Which crops survive poor rain? Which fields flood first? Which winter signs predict harsher cold? Which family helped during famine? Which lord can be trusted? This knowledge mattered. Survival depended on memory, and memory depended on community. As years pass, your body begins changing. The strength of youth slowly fades. The same hands that once moved quickly across fields now carry scars, rough skin, and stiffness earned through decades of labour. Your back remembers every harvest. Your knees remember every winter. Your shoulders remember every heavy load carried through mud. Aging in the medieval world is not gentle. Years of physical work leave visible marks. But if you reach old age, you carry something precious in return. Experience. You become one of the village elders. Younger people seek advice. Children listen to stories you heard from those older than you. You remember winters they never saw, harvests they never worked, storms they never survived. You become living memory. And in a world where written records are rare for ordinary people, memory becomes a form of inheritance. But even the strongest peasant, the wisest elder, the hardest worker, and the most resilient survivor eventually faces the one certainty no labour can delay forever: death. Medieval people lived much closer to death than most modern societies do. Death was not hidden away in distant hospitals. It was present in everyday life. Children saw funerals. Families cared for the sick at home. Villagers witnessed childbirth risks, accidents, disease, famine, and old age firsthand. This did not make death easy, but it made death familiar. People understood from a young age that life was fragile. Religion shaped how many processed this reality. For medieval Christians, earthly suffering was temporary compared to eternity. Heaven, hell, judgment, sin, repentance, salvation. These were not abstract concepts reserved for theologians. They shaped daily emotional life. Faith offered explanation when life felt cruel. If harvest failed, perhaps suffering had purpose. If a child died, perhaps they rested with God. If life felt unfair, divine justice promised eventual balance. Whether one fully believes this or not, faith gave millions of medieval people strength to endure conditions that might otherwise feel unbearable. And perhaps endurance is the word that best defines medieval peasant life. Endurance. Not glory, not luxury, not comfort. Endurance. Waking when exhausted because animals still need feeding. Walking into frozen mornings because firewood still needs gathering. Working through hunger because fields still need planting. Continuing after grief because children still need care. Surviving because stopping was never truly an option. That kind of endurance deserves admiration. Today we live in a world filled with extraordinary convenience. We turn on lights instantly. We control temperature with buttons. Clean water flows from taps. Medicine treats infections that once killed. Food arrives from across the world. Mattresses support aching backs. Painkillers reduce suffering. Communication travels instantly. These comforts are so normal that we rarely stop to appreciate how revolutionary they would appear to someone from the 1400s. Imagine showing a medieval peasant a modern home. Warm showers, electric light, refrigeration, soft beds, heating, medicine, toothpaste, dentists. They might think they had entered heaven. And perhaps that perspective offers one final lesson. History does not only teach us about the past, it teaches us about the present. Understanding how ordinary people once lived helps us appreciate what we now possess. It reminds us how much invisible labour shaped civilization. It reminds us that comfort is not automatic, safety is not guaranteed, convenience is not universal, and resilience, the ability to continue despite hardship, has always been one of humanity's defining strengths. So, was being a medieval peasant exhausting? Absolutely. It was exhausting in ways modern people rarely experience physically, emotionally, and mentally. Every season carried risk. Every harvest carried pressure. Every winter carried fear. Hunger waited in bad weather. Disease waited in injury. Death waited in uncertainty. Even sleep, the one refuge from labour, often came with discomfort, and yet they endured, they planted, they harvested, they raised children, they buried loved ones, they rebuilt after storms, they prayed, they hoped, they continued, again and again, year after year, generation after generation, and that may be the most extraordinary thing of all. As our journey through this medieval village finally comes to an end, night settles softly over the countryside. The fields lie dark beneath the moon. Wind moves gently through tall grass. Smoke rises from the last glowing hearths. The distant church bell rings one final time before silence slowly spreads across the village. Inside your small cottage, the fire burns low, its warm orange glow dancing across rough wooden walls. The room smells of smoke, straw, wool, and earth. Your hands ache from years of work. Your body feels heavy with exhaustion. But tonight, at least for a little while, the world is quiet. No lord demanding taxes, no storm threatening crops, no field waiting to be ploughed, no tools needing repair, no animals calling for attention, no fear of tomorrow, just darkness, just warmth, just stillness. Your family sleeps nearby, their breathing soft and steady. Outside, the cold night stretches across medieval Europe, touching castles, monasteries, forests, roads, and villages alike. But here, in this tiny cottage built from wood, mud, and hope, you allow your eyes to close. Tomorrow the rooster will crow again. The cycle will begin again. The labour will return. The worries will return. Life will continue. But not yet. Tonight, for a few precious hours, you rest. And maybe that is the most beautiful thing about ordinary human life across all of history. No matter how difficult the world becomes, people still find ways to keep going. People still find reasons to wake up. People still choose tomorrow.